So we've already started to look at SharePoint Central Administration, at least for the Secure Store service. So we can manage permissions there. In this case, manage permissions for if we have a BDC application defined, which we didn't look at that yet, but that's where we can manage permissions for the BDC model. We can create and manage actions there and set up the search content sources and create and configure profile pages. Now also we can use SharePoint Designer, so power users are going to want to use SharePoint Designer, and it's really easy in SharePoint Designer to connect to databases and build external content types. It has really strong tools for working with UI. Now I can't believe I'm actually saying that, because I used to hate SharePoint Designer. And the reason why I used to hate SharePoint Designer is because people would always use it to make modifications to a site, and it would just save all the changes directly into the content database, and there would be no artifacts. So as a developer, that would drive me crazy, because if I needed to go from development to staging to whatever environment, production, whatever's next, QA, staging, production, it was really hard to do that. I had to do a site collection backup or something like that, and I did not like that. I like building everything out and having everything defined in a nice solution package, but in SharePoint Designer used to always mess that up. Well, now you can kind of have your cake and eat it too, because SharePoint Designer will allow you to build these models for your data sources, and it'll still do it, generate and save it directly into whatever site you're connected to, but also gives you the ability to export your model as a file, and then you can take it into VisualStudio and put it into a regular farm solution and deploy it that way. So you get the best of both worlds. SharePoint Designer is great for workflow, and now for VisualStudio 2013 you can still do programmatic manipulation of the BCS, so you can create business data connectivity model project. There's a template to create a BDC model. I don't recommend ever doing that. The only way I would ever do that would be I would create that and then delete whatever Visual Studio created, and I would create the model in SharePoint Designer and then export it and save it, and then bring it into Visual Studio 2013 into this BDC model project, and then just copy my XML file that I got from SharePoint Designer into that. So that would be how I would use it. Unless, of course, you have to build a custom .NET assembly and you need to consume that assembly, then maybe I would use Visual Studio 2013 to create the custom assembly if you had to, some data source that wasn't exposed any other way. So what we're going to do now is we'll use Central Administration and SharePoint Designer to go ahead and create an external content type in a list. Okay, we're back where we left off on the last demo in Central Administration. And so I'm going to start up SharePoint Designer now. And I'll connect to my site. And what I'm going to do is I want to create an external content type. So I'll click on external content types, and then I'm going to click on the new external content type button, and we're going to call it Northwind Customers. And for the display name, we'll just make it pretty. Okay, and now for the office item type, I'm going to keep this at generic list. You can actually change it to be, appointment contact. So if you have like a contacts list, you could say contact, and then you could actually use it in Office. So like Office applications like Outlook are smart about that and knows how to use a contacts list, and so you could actually bring it into Outlook, and you could edit those contacts from the external list directly in Outlook, and then you could also even sync it from Outlook, so you could make changes offline and they would sync, because the first time you used it, Outlook would actually install the business connectivity services client object model. So that would happen automatically as like it's like a Visto. It's a Visto application, VSTO, Visual Studio Tools for Office application. But we're not going to do that here. We're just connecting to Northwind. So I'm going to open up, just show you. I have a local database instance here on my server, and I have the Northwind database right here. So we'll connect to the customers table. So I'm going to I need to get to the external data source. So click here. I've already done this. I'm going to delete that. We'll just do it again. So I'm going to add connection, and the data source type is going to be SQL Server. Say OK. So the server name, MCC. It's my server. My database name is Northwind, and I'm just going to call it Northwind. That's how it's going to show up in the UI. And I don't want to connect with a user's identity. I want to impersonate a Windows identity. So now we need to give it the secure store application ID. So that's this right here, Northwind. We created that target application. So here's our target application. We'll put in Northwind so that it knows to grab the right credentials to connect to Northwind. Okay, it found it. So now I'm going to drill into the customers table, and I'm going to create, I don't want to create all operations. I just want this data to be read-only because we're letting all authenticated users connect to it. So I'm going to do a read item operation. That's just to display a single item, and this wizard comes up. So I'm going to leave the names the same, the default. I'll click next. That looks good. We're getting a warning here that the customer ID is read-only and required. Read-only and required properties are set to true. Well, that's okay because it's read-only data. So I don't care if it's required or not. It's going to be read-only. Nobody's going to be able to edit the data. So I'm going to click Finish. So here's our first operation, the read. Now we need one more. We need to actually make this as a list. So we need the read list operation. Take the defaults for the names. You could add a filter here if you want. I'm not going to add a filter, but later on we will. But again, like if I could add a filter, that would be so the type of filter could be, I could put in a limit filter. So I could say, okay, only give me 50 total records if I wanted to. I'm not going to do that. So you can actually, we'll talk about that later, but you can actually configure that. So I'm going to cancel this. I don't want to do a filter now. Let's go ahead and go back to the read list operation. Take the defaults. I don't want a filter. And so for the external item picker, I'm going to use the company name. And customer ID, I don't care about that being read-only and required. That's fine. I'll click Finish. So now we have the two operations defined. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. So this is being actually saved into the business data connectivity metadata store right now. So SharePoint just put it into SharePoint, or I'm sorry, SharePoint Designer just saved that into the that BDC store on our server, on our farm. Okay, that's good. So now that I have the external content type, now I want to create a list based off of that. So I'll click here, create lists in form. And I'll have a new list. I'm just going to call it Northwind Customers. And I'm not going to use the info path. I'm just going to take the default. So I'll say OK. So now it's creating that list. And let's go ahead and open up the site. Oh, close this out. Let's open up the site collection. And notice how we have our Northwind customers list here. If I click that, it's actually going out. Oh, so one thing I forgot to do oh, okay, this is good. I misspelled the target application, so that's good. So let's fix that. Also, one thing I didn't show you yet, I do want to show, is let's go to Service Applications. Let's go to Business Data Connectivity Service. And so this got created here, even though it's the wrong name. That's okay. Now, one thing I did already previously was I set metadata store permissions. So what this does, this is kind of like a template. So this is like a default. So I put in all users can edit, execute, and select in clients, so they can use the client-side object model. And then myself, I put everything, so I can set permissions as well. So, but this isn't associated with anything. So what this means is that anytime a new service application is added, it's going to get these defaults. So if I look here, if I check my service application and I go to set object permissions, they're already set because it was using the defaults there. Otherwise, I'd have to set them myself. So let's get out of here. Let's go back in SharePoint Designer. It's a lot easier to work with this in SharePoint Designer. So I'm going to go back to my external content type. I'm going to edit it, and you know what? I'm going to go ahead and just delete this. We'll just start over. It's pretty easy. External content types. We'll delete that. Okay, let's start over again. Call it Northwind customers. Okay, and we already have our data source, but I'm going to okay, that looks good. Let's just go through and set this up. Okay, so let's do this. Let's go ahead and we don't have any external. I'm going to go back into the BDC and we'll just get rid of it in there. So we don't have any external content types. Okay, that's good. I'll just call it Northwind. Make it easier. And let's get rid of this, and we'll add a connection. Start over. Oops. That was the thing that we were missing before. We had that misspelled. It was going to the wrong secure store application. Now we're good. Now we can drill in. Do a read operation on that. Okay, we'll give it a different name. Okay, let's do this. Let's get rid of this data connection. And we'll give it a different name. I've done this so many times on this server, it's colliding, so we'll just call it Northwind DB. database name. Incorrect. Okay. Okay, now we'll do the relist operation. We don't need a filter here. We will do the picker though. Finish that. Save that. Okay, and then we'll just call this Northwind customers again. Since I deleted that list, I should be fine. Click OK. Now we can go to the site. I'll refresh the page. So the list is there again, and now it should connect. And there we go. We get our data coming from our SQL Server Northwind database. And so now we are exposing it in SharePoint using business connectivity services. So a basic external content type allows display and editing of line of business data. Generally, this isn't enough to complete most use cases. Users need to be able to do things with the data just, beyond just viewing and editing. And you can add behavior to the ribbon or list item menu using standard custom actions. Well, custom actions, they're not a BCS feature, and BCS does not extend their behavior. So if you want to use a custom action with BCS, you create a custom action feature element in the same manner used for any other scenario. And you can create custom actions to deploy items to the list item menu or to the ribbon. Now, the challenge with custom action with regards to BCS is that the URL action attribute does not allow you to insert column values for a given item into the URL. So, for example, on a regular list, when you look at the, you drill down into the list item, you get the list item menu, and say, for example, you press delete item. Well, it's actually telling SharePoint what list item ID you want to delete. Or let's say, for example, you add a custom action that's going to go to a URL. Let's say you have a products list, and you want to send the ID, the product ID, or list item ID of your product to a special page to display the product. And you can make that a custom action. And if it's just a regular SharePoint list, you can use a formatted URL, using a string format with a standard, .NET formatting. You can use the list ID token or the list item ID token. That doesn't work. Those tokens aren't available with BCS. BCS won't populate that list item ID or the list ID. So if you need that functionality, then that's when you need to do, you could use JavaScript or server-side code if you wanted to do that. But the replacement for that with BCS is just to use an action instead of a custom action. And the action doesn't have that limitation. So it allows you to pass in that data from, values from that list item menu. So you only would use an action only for the list item menu only. And so that's how you get the column values into the target URL. You can't do it with a custom action with BCS, but you can use the action to do that. So what we're going to look at now is adding behavior to that list that we brought in, the Northwind customers. So we're back to our Northwind customers external list that we created. And remember, when we looked at the menu, the list item menu, all we can do is view item. And so we could create a custom action, but it wouldn't pass any of the values of this current list item to the action URL. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into Central Administration, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to go to, first of all, I need to go into the Business Data Connectivity Service application. And now notice how we have, here's our Northwind Business Data Connectivity Service. And so I'm going to go ahead and add an action. So I'll click this. I'm going to name it, I'm just going to say map it. And so notice how I've already done this a few times, so the URL is already here. But what I like to do is pass in the city and state from the customer's list into this URL to go ahead and produce a map. So you can see here I'm using Bing.com maps, and this is the typical URL. But no, this is the important part. The Q part represents the query that's sent to Bing Maps, and so here I'm saying Q equals 0 plus 1, so it's going to be basically Q equals city plus state. And so then I need to fill in those parameters, the 0, the first parameter, and the second parameter, the 0 and 1. So I want to, actually I would like to open this in a new web browser window so we don't lose our spot. Now we need to add parameters. So the first parameter I want to add is city. The next one I want to add is state. Actually, in this case, it's called region. So I'll add that parameter. And that's all I really need to do for that. So now I'm going to say OK. And this is going to, so that's going to persist that. So that is, the action has been created. But the only problem is it only affects new external lists that get created. So the existing external list we have right now, it's not going to affect it. So if I go back here, even if I refresh the page, it's still not going to be there. So what I need to do, I'm going to go into SharePoint Designer, and I'm just going to delete that list. I'll create it again. And let's just go ahead and external content types. Let's open this up. Create lists. Call it Northland Customers again. Okay, so let's refresh this again. Here's our list. Now we should see that item show up, and here it is, and map it. So now it's going to pass the data from this record. So it's going to pass in Berlin. It won't have a region, so it's only going to be Berlin. So let's see if we can find one with a region. Let's see if I can find something in United States, maybe. I don't know if there's any in here. Oh, here we go. Seattle, Washington. Kirkland. Okay, let's do Seattle, Washington. So I'll click on Map It, and it should open in a new window because we told it to. And sure enough, there is Seattle, Washington. So, and you notice here in the URL, Q equals Seattle plus WA. So that's our first parameter is this city, and then the second parameter was the region field, and that got passed in from the BCS list item. If you need to populate action URL parameters, you have to use an action in BCS. You can't use the custom action. So a typical line of business data store has a large number of items, and the SharePoint list user interface is designed just for a limited number of items displayed as views. And BCS allows you to create useful subsets of information for display via filters. So you can do things like you can restrict results from the data source. So this is important. This is actually a nice enhancement in SharePoint 2013. Was before the paging would always occur on the client, meaning inside SharePoint. So even you can see now we had paging in our list, but that was being done on the client side, not at the data source. Now we can set it up where we can pass. You can actually pass filters from the BCS store directly into the data source as basically like predicates, like link predicates, and then have those be executed on the server if the server supports that. So again, the backend has to provide that required functionality, but it can be done. Filters are basically they are required for a number of scenarios with BCS. So one of the most important ones is finder methods for pickers. So you notice how if you need to, like in our case, we have the Northwind customers, and we actually designated the customer name field as the field to use for a picker. Well, when the picker comes up, it's not going to display everything in a drop-down list because there could be too many. So you need to have a search method. Basically, the best analogy to this is the way the people picker works in SharePoint. So the people picker is usually, it's going against whatever your authentication source is, so or whatever your claims provider is. And so in our case, it's claims provider is Active Directory, so it's using that claims provider for Active Directory, and it's when you type in a name, it goes out and resolves that name, or it helps you. You can do searches, you can find additional names. So this is the same type of functionality, only it's for a BCS list. The filters are also required for establishing row limits and then also doing paging. And there's no interactive filters for list views in SharePoint Foundation. You have to use the server version. Okay, external data columns. Well, one thing that's extremely useful is that you can have an external data column provide a lookup to external data with a picker style interface, just like I was talking about with the people picker. It will use that whatever entity you're using, in our case customers, it can use that entity's filters. So external data columns are available as list but not site columns. And so the useful feature of the external data column picker is that it supports the inclusion of actions on found items. And so you can display, and the other thing that's pretty nice too is you can display the primary column, but you can also add additional columns too. So if you want to add a little bit more context, maybe you want to show first and last name or something like that, or phone number. Again, that's that familiar picker interface, which is very familiar with SharePoint users, and it supports actions. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create and use a filter so we can have an external data column. We'll go ahead and add that external data column to a document library. Okay, I'm going to open up SharePoint Designer. I'm going to go back to our external content type, and I'll just select this. I'm going to open it up, and what I want to do is I'm going to go to the read list operation, and I'm going to edit it. So the wizard comes back up, and I'm going to go to the filters page, and so I want to add a filter parameter here, and I want to use let's use the company name. Let's use contact name. It's easier. And we'll add the filter, and I'll call it. I'm going to call this filter by name. And it's going to be a wildcard filter, so kind of like the Google search where we can start typing in the first letter of somebody's name and see the search results. So field is contact name. If the value is null, we'll just ignore it. We'll bring everything back if there's nothing entered in. And we want to use this to create a match list in an external item picker. We want to use this filter. So we'll say OK. And then we'll just finish. Actually, let me let's make sure that that's correct. Yeah. Okay, and we'll save this off. Okay, now I'm going to go into site and go. Okay, I need to go to this library. I think I've already done this before in this, so we're going to delete the column that we added. So I already added a customer column. So let's go ahead and delete this. We'll just go back and create a column. So customer column's gone now. Let's just make sure, bring this our documents list up. And I just have a little notepad file in here, a little text file. So let's go back and go to settings. We'll add a column now. Create column. And I'll call it customer again. The data type is going to be external data. So as soon as I click on external data, I'm going to get prompted. So here's my, I need to find, okay, what external content type am I going to use? So I'm going to say Northwind, and it'll just try to resolve that. And it found it. Okay, so there's my external content type. And this is interesting here. What field do I want to show? Well, I want to show the contact name. We'll display the actions menu. And I also want to show the company name as well. So contact name and company name is what's going to display. Let's see. Come back here. So now let's edit this item. And that's fine. Oh, I didn't want to edit the document. I want to edit the list item. So edit the properties, not the actual document itself. Okay, so now let's find our customer, and let me go into SQL real quick and let's just pick one out in SQL Server. In the Northwind database, let's go to customers. Okay, I didn't want to do that. I want to go ahead and select, oops, select top 1000. Let's get rid of this. Okay, so let's pick contact name. How about Maria? Let's use Maria as the first name. So we'll come back and we'll type in Maria and see if we can get that resolved. So this is the exact functionality of the people picker. Same good user experience. And so I can click here and look, it's already finding the correct users. It's using that wildcard filter to give us the closest matches. So we'll pick this and then we'll save. And now you can see we're bringing in that external data from our Northwind database, SQL Server database table. So here's the name showing up and then the additional company name showing up here. So this is a great example. We're integrating external data into a list in SharePoint. So we're combining two data sources in one view here, that's part of the power of business connectivity services. Okay, so a profile page displays entity data and it's used for search results and optionally as a link via a BCS action. You can generate profile pages through SharePoint Designer or Central Admin. Again, they will get presented to the user in search results. So normally search crawls of SharePoint sites exclude external lists, so you need to require the BCS content source. You just need to add that content source to your search crawler, and then it'll crawl that data. And then if you have the profile page associated with the external content type, then it'll use that to display the BCS search results.